Right now, beneath the soil of the American heartland, something is happening that has geologists, military analysts, and biblical scholars all looking at the same data and arriving at conclusions none of them expected. Along a stretch of land running through the central United States, from the northern edge of the New Madrid seismic zone in Missouri down through Arkansas, Tennessee, and into Mississippi, ground monitoring stations have begun recording a pattern of micro-tremors that does not match any known tectonic behavior in the region. These are not random vibrations scattered across the zone the way normal seismic activity distributes itself. They are sequential. They are building in a direction. And the direction they are building follows a straight line that, when extended on a map, points directly toward the Gulf of Mexico. At the same time, residents living above the most active sections of this line are reporting things they cannot explain. Water wells that have functioned without interruption for decades are producing water with a faint sulfuric odor that was not present before. Dogs and horses are refusing specific areas of pasture with no visible reason. And in 3 separate counties sitting directly above the most concentrated tremor activity, sinkholes have opened overnight without any preceding rainfall, construction, or geological event that authorities can point to as a cause. Each of these observations has a scientific framework that partially addresses it. The New Madrid seismic zone is one of the most studied fault systems in North America, and unusual activity within it is not without precedent. Sulfur compounds in groundwater can result from shifts in subsurface pressure affecting aquifer chemistry. Animal sensitivity to pre-seismic infrasound is a documented phenomenon. Sinkholes in limestone-rich geology can open with limited surface warning. But what none of these frameworks account for is the timing. All of it, the tremors, the water, the animals, the sinkholes, is happening simultaneously, in sequence, along the same line, accelerating. And that acceleration is what is drawing attention from people who do not normally look at seismic data through a biblical lens, because when they overlay the tremor pattern on a map of prophetic geography, what they find is not a coincidence. It is a corridor. If this message is reaching you right now, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below, because what we are about to walk through connects the ground beneath your feet to warnings written thousands of years ago that most Americans have never been shown. America is not named in the Bible. That statement surprises people, and it is worth sitting with for a moment before moving forward, because the absence of America from biblical prophecy is itself significant. Every major nation that plays a role in the end times narrative of Scripture is identified either by name or by geography that allows for clear identification. Babylon is named. Egypt is named. Israel is named. The kings of the East are identified by direction and described with enough specificity that the region they represent is not ambiguous. Even Rome, never named directly, is described through imagery so precise that scholars have identified it with near universal agreement across 2,000 years of interpretation. But America, the most powerful nation in the history of the modern world, the country that has shaped global politics, economics, military balance, and cultural influence for over a century, does not appear. There is no eagle that clearly represents it. There is no Western nation described with the kind of geographic or cultural specificity that would allow confident identification. America is simply absent from the prophetic map, and that absence raises a question that biblical scholars have debated for generations. Not whether America exists in the eyes of God, but why a nation of this size, this power, and this influence would play no visible role in the events described in the final chapters of human history. There are several possible answers. One is that America appears under a description we have not yet correctly identified. Another is that America's role in end times events is peripheral rather than central, present but unnamed. But the third possibility is the one that makes people uncomfortable. The third possibility is that America is absent from the end times narrative because by the time those events fully unfold, America as it currently exists is no longer the dominant force it is today. Not necessarily destroyed, not necessarily gone, but diminished, shaken, reduced from its current position by something that happened before the final sequence began. And if that is the case, then what is happening beneath the American heartland right now is not irrelevant to that picture. It may be the beginning of it. The New Madrid seismic zone is the most dangerous fault system in North America that most Americans know almost nothing about. When people think of earthquake risk in the United States, they think of California. They think of the San Andreas Fault, the Pacific Coast, the images of collapsed freeways and shattered buildings from 1989 and 1994. What they do not think about is the center of the country. But geologists have known for decades that the New Madrid zone represents a threat that in certain scenarios dwarfs anything the San Andreas is capable of producing. In the winter of 1811 and 1812, a sequence of earthquakes struck the New Madrid zone that remain the most powerful seismic events in recorded North American history. The largest of them, estimated at a magnitude between 7.5 and 8.0, caused the Mississippi River to flow backward for a period of time. It rang church bells in Boston. It was felt as far away as Washington, D.C. and Quebec. It created new lakes, destroyed entire forests, and dramatically altered the landscape of a region spanning 5 states. And it struck a part of the country that in 1812 was sparsely populated. Today, the cities sitting above the New Madrid zone include Memphis, Tennessee, St. Louis, Missouri, Little Rock, Arkansas, Evansville, Indiana, and the infrastructure running through and beneath this region includes some of the most critical systems in the entire United States. The Mississippi River itself, the main artery of American agricultural commerce, runs directly through the zone. Major natural gas pipelines cross it. Interstate highway systems cross it. The bridges spanning the Mississippi River in this region have been assessed by structural engineers as among the most vulnerable to seismic failure in the country. A repeat of the 1811 and 1812 sequence in the current era would not be a regional disaster. It would be a national one. And the tremors currently building along this zone are not behaving the way normal background seismic activity behaves. They are concentrating, they are sequencing, and they are moving in a direction. When structural geologists mapped the current tremor sequence against the historical record of New Madrid activity, something stood out immediately. Previous episodes of elevated activity in the zone have distributed themselves across the fault network in patterns that reflect stress being released at multiple points simultaneously. The current sequence is not doing that. Instead of spreading across the zone, the tremors are clustering along a narrow corridor within it, and that clustering is moving. Each week, the densest concentration of activity shifts slightly further south along the corridor, as if something beneath the surface is traveling. The rate of movement is slow, measurable only when weeks of data are compared against each other. But it is consistent. It is not random drift. It is directional progression. And when the projected path of that progression is extended forward based on current rate and direction, it terminates at the point where the Mississippi River Delta meets the Gulf of Mexico, a location that geologists have long identified as a zone of deep crustal weakness where the North American plate sits above ancient rift structures that have not been fully active since long before any instrument existed to measure them. From a purely geological perspective, this is concerning, but not unprecedented. Deep crustal systems can transmit stress over long distances, and the Mississippi embayment, the broad depression through which the river runs, sits above geological formations that connect the New Madrid zone to the Gulf Coast at depth. Stress migrating southward along this pathway is physically possible, but what makes the current pattern unusual is not just the direction. It is the regularity. Natural stress migration is irregular. It accelerates and decelerates. It shifts laterally. It responds to the heterogeneous structure of the rock it moves through in ways that produce variation. What is being recorded beneath the American heartland right now is not varying. It is maintaining its pace. It is holding its line. And it is building toward a terminus that sits beneath one of the most economically and strategically critical coastlines in the entire Western Hemisphere. The water well reports began coming in from 3 separate counties within the same 2-week window. Farmers and rural homeowners across a stretch of land in northeastern Arkansas and southeastern Missouri started noticing that water drawn from wells that had been in continuous use for anywhere from 20 to over 50 years had developed a faint but unmistakable odor. Not strong, not dangerous at the levels being detected, but present, consistent, and new. Water testing conducted by county health departments confirmed elevated hydrogen sulfide levels in multiple samples, a compound produced when subsurface pressure shifts force water through geological formations containing sulfur-bearing minerals. The scientific explanation is straightforward and technically adequate. But what the scientific explanation does not account for is the geographic precision of where these reports are clustered. They are not distributed randomly across the region. They are concentrated along the same corridor where the tremor sequence is most active, in the same counties where the sinkholes have been appearing, directly above the line that is moving south. When you remove each event from its context and examine it alone, the science holds. When you map all of them together and notice that every anomaly is occurring along the same narrow corridor in the same compressed window of time, the science becomes less satisfying as a complete answer. Because science explains mechanisms. It does not always explain patterns. And the pattern beneath the American heartland, right now, is not the pattern of a system releasing stress randomly and naturally. It is the pattern of a system doing something specific. Something directed. Something that, if you have read the book of Isaiah or the book of Revelation or the words of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, you have seen described before. Not in geological terms. In prophetic ones. Like this video right now if this is speaking to something you have been sensing. Subscribe so you are notified when we continue this. And share it with someone in your life who needs to understand that what is happening beneath this country is not separate from what is happening spiritually above it. The sinkholes are the detail that moved this story from concerning to urgent for many of the researchers tracking it. Sinkholes are not unusual in karst geology, the type of limestone-rich terrain where water dissolves rock over long periods and creates underground voids that eventually collapse. Florida, for example, experiences sinkholes regularly as a function of its geology and its groundwater dynamics. But the sinkholes opening in the counties above the New Madrid corridor do not fit the karst model. The geology of northeastern Arkansas and the Missouri Boot Heel is not predominantly karst terrain. The limestone layers that do exist in the region are not at the depths or configurations that typically produce sudden surface collapse without a preceding trigger such as heavy rainfall, drought-induced water table drop, or concentrated human activity, like mining or deep water injection. None of those triggers were present in the weeks before these sinkholes opened. There was no unusual rainfall event. The water table in the region has not experienced the kind of rapid fluctuation that destabilizes karst systems. There is no mining activity in the affected areas. And the sinkholes themselves are not behaving like typical karst collapses. They are deep relative to their surface diameter in a ratio that geologists associate with something pushing up from below rather than something collapsing down from above. When the profile of a sinkhole narrows at the bottom rather than widening, it suggests that the void was not formed by gradual dissolution from the surface downward. It was formed by pressure from depth forcing a pathway upward. Something beneath the surface in those counties is looking for a way out, and it is finding it in the same corridor, in the same sequence, moving in the same direction as everything else that is building beneath this region right now. In the book of Isaiah chapter 24, it is written, "The earth is broken up, the earth is split asunder, the earth is thoroughly shaken. The earth reels like a drunkard, it sways like a hut in the wind." The verse does not describe a localized event. It describes a condition, a state of the ground itself becoming unstable across a region, not because of a single cause but because something beneath it is changed. That language has always been treated as apocalyptic poetry by readers who have never stood above a fault system and felt the ground shift beneath them. It reads differently when you are looking at a map of the American heartland and watching a sequence of connected anomalies build southward along a corridor of ancient crustal weakness toward the coast. America sits at a crossroads in prophetic history that very few people are talking about directly. The nation was founded on principles that its founders explicitly connected to biblical covenant. The language of the founding documents, the imagery used by the earliest leaders, the sermons preached in the churches that shaped the national identity in its first century, all of them drew on the idea that this nation had been set apart for a purpose, that it carried a responsibility, that the blessing it had been given was conditional on the faithfulness with which it honored the God who gave it. John Winthrop, standing on a ship before the first Puritan settlers landed in Massachusetts in 1630, preached a sermon that used the language of Deuteronomy. He told the people that they were entering into a covenant, that if they honored it, they would be a city on a hill, blessed, protected, and multiplied, and that if they broke it, the blessings would be removed and the curses of broken covenant would follow. That sermon was not forgotten. It was quoted by presidents. It was referenced in inaugural addresses. It became part of the mythology of American identity. And the scripture it drew on, the blessings and curses of Deuteronomy, are not metaphorical. They are specific. They describe what happens to a nation that was given much and then turned away. The ground becomes unproductive. The waters become unreliable. The foundations begin to shake. The strength that once made the nation great becomes a source of vulnerability rather than security. None of this means America is cursed. None of this means what is happening beneath the heartland is divine punishment being delivered in real time. Scripture is far more careful than that, and so should we be. But it does mean that a nation built on covenant language, that has moved progressively and measurably away from the values that language describes, that has exported its influence across the world while its internal foundations have weakened, is not immune to the pattern that Scripture describes for nations that were given much and squandered it. The ground beneath America is speaking right now. Not loudly, not catastrophically, not yet, but it is speaking. And the question that every person watching this needs to sit with is not whether the geological data is accurate. It is. The question is whether we as a nation and as individuals within that nation are paying attention to what it is saying before it says it louder. What does Scripture say about this moment? Not about America specifically, because as we noted, America is not named, but about the condition of the earth in the days before the return of Christ. In the Gospel of Luke chapter 21, Jesus describes signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and on the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, people fainting from fear and the expectation of what is coming upon the world. The word translated as perplexity in that passage carries the meaning of having no way out, of facing a situation for which no existing solution is adequate. That is a precise description of what geologists, emergency management officials, and infrastructure planners face when they model a major New Madrid event in the current era. There is no adequate response plan. The bridges cannot be quickly replaced. The pipelines cannot be rapidly rerouted. The millions of people in the affected cities cannot be efficiently evacuated through a highway network that would itself be compromised by the event. The perplexity is not a failure of planning. It is a function of scale. No human institution is equipped to manage what a full New Madrid sequence would produce in a country as interconnected and infrastructure dependent as the modern United States. And Jesus said that perplexity, that specific condition of nations facing what they cannot solve, would be one of the signs. Not the final sign, not the only sign, but a sign, placed alongside others in a sequence that builds until the one who gave the signs returns to resolve what humanity cannot resolve on its own. The ground beneath America is not moving because God is angry at America specifically. It is moving because we are in the season that was described, because the sequence has begun, because the signs are building in multiple locations across the earth simultaneously, and the American heartland is one of those locations. And the instruction Jesus gave to his disciples when they asked what they should do when these things began to happen was not to panic. It was not to stockpile supplies or build bunkers or develop evacuation routes. It was 3 words. Look up. Lift your heads. Because when the earth begins to shake and the nations are in perplexity and the things that were written begin to visibly unfold, that is not the signal to be afraid. It is the signal that the one who wrote it all down is about to step back into the story he never actually left. There is a peace available in this moment that does not depend on the ground staying still. It does not depend on the fault system remaining quiet or the tremors reversing or the sinkholes closing up or the water returning to normal. It is a peace that, as the book of Philippians describes it, surpasses all understanding. It is the peace of someone who knows the author of the story they are living inside, who has read enough of the book to know that the shaking is not the ending, that the darkness before the dawn is still followed by the dawn. that the God who named the valley of Megiddo and the river Euphrates and the city of Jerusalem in prophecy written thousands of years before any of those locations became headlines also knows your name, also knows the ground beneath your feet, also knows every fear you have carried into this season and every question you have been afraid to ask out loud. The signs beneath America are real. The pattern is building. The sequence is accelerating. And none of that changes the most important truth available to anyone watching this right now, which is that the God who set all of this in motion also provided a way through it. Not around it, through it. And that way has a name. And his name is the same today as it was when the first disciples stood on a hillside watching him ascend, and were told by angels standing with them that this same Jesus, who was taken up, would come back in the same way. The ground may shake. The waters may change. The foundations of the most powerful nation on earth may tremble in ways that no human institution can fully prepare for. But for those who are watching, who are awake, who have placed their trust in the one who holds all of it in his hands, the shaking is not something to run from. It is something to stand in, steady, unafraid, looking up, because everything being shaken right now is being shaken for a reason. And the reason, according to every prophet who ever wrote about this moment, is that what cannot be shaken is about to be revealed.